Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Çiğdem Çelik, Fatma Çiğdem Çelik from Istanbul. I have the honor of chairing this session. We have 3 presentations. We will start with Professor Johanna Purica, and then we will continue with the other 2 young researchers. We have 1.5 hours. I thought that maybe 20-25 minutes. Let's leave some time for at least 1 question. Before we start, I want to speak about CV of professor, but first let me thank to the Italian Association of Energy Economists and also the team that is working so hard to prepare all these sessions. Thank you very much for having me. Now I continue with our first presenter's CV, professor. Professor has, it's a long CV, but let me briefly summarize. He's a senior researcher in the Romanian Academy Institute for Economic Forecasting and executive director of the Advisory Center for Energy and Environment. Dr. Purica was also a counselor of the Minister of Economy, plus also he has worked with the Minister of Environment and also an expert for the Parliament. He has actually, he was a project officer for energy and infrastructure in the World Bank, and also he has many advisory positions with different institutions. He has authored books and many articles. The interesting thing is he has 2 PhDs. One is, the first one is in nuclear energy engineering, and the second one is in economics. At the end, I will have a question related with the nuclear fusion that we have read recently, Professor.
Thank you. You're very kind in mentioning all those things. It means only that I turned around the energy sector. Allow me to now to start my presentation related to energy security.
Please.
Just a minute. Okay. One of the things that is actually very fashionable nowadays is the shift of strategies in the European Union. I was a member of the advisory group for energy of the Commission, of the European Commission, and participated in 3 great big strategies. One was the one for climate change. Obviously, call it Green Deal, Fit for 55. It's an evolution of the concept. The other one was energy security. And the third one is innovation in energy. Obviously, as we can see nowadays, because of the, let's say, attack on energy security, where energy is used as a weapon by some states that are doing all sorts of military activity in Ukraine. We started shifting from emissions reduction to security. A good example is a lignite mine in Germany that, in order to be enlarged, meant the decommissioning of a wind park to produce more coal for a coal-fired power plant that was supposed to be shut down, but it's not because of the lack of gas from Russia. There are various types of risks that we are subject to, and these are what I want to present today are a few of the things that one should look for in terms of energy security. As you see, I put together various types of potential risks hazards and various others. You see this earthquake, you see this tower collapse because of various causes. That's floods, even terrorist attacks is a risk nowadays. Let me go further and see what type of risk are most important, and that some results on coming from the analysis of those types of risks. We have data in Romania, big data actually, on each county of in the country, and you see here an inventory for climate change, where data from let's say 1961 to 2011, average temperatures and average precipitations for each county. There are 41 counties in Romania, resulted in an inventory where you have temperatures over a certain probabilities, of course, calculated from that data, over 0 Celsius, and high precipitation and low precipitation. Obviously, the combination of the two is giving either flood or drought. Low temperatures with high and low precipitations are giving snow and freezing. Obviously, all these are generating maps of the country, and knowing the risks, you can establish a policy of insurance, for example, or improve the reaction, the mitigation policies to this risk, or the adaptation. Just an example of the distribution of a potential risk premium per capita in each county, based on the risk, on the total risk combination of the four that I described above. Obviously, this was an analysis done over a number of months and 1.5 years actually, and resulted in some potential applications of the total risk, for example, to the gas grid of Romania. Obviously, I have done something for Italy, for Enea, when I was a researcher, an international researcher there, with landslide and earthquake combined with the mechanical potential probabilities of failures for Italy. As you see, North Italy is more prone to risk because the grid is more dense in there. Romania, the same thing on gas grid and the potential risk for exposure to climate change. There are another type of risks that I want to underline. There was an analysis done on a power grid, and you find that there are certain critical points in the power grid. If you attack those critical points, and that could be a terrorist action, for example, you can produce a blackout. One other thing, in order to understand what the evolution of a potential energy system is going to be, you need models, you need to analyze scenarios. We have done something like that for Romania for the penetration of nuclear. You know, we have 2 units in operation, 700 megawatts each, CANDU type, natural uranium heavy water, moderated and cooled. And we are going to finalize 2 more units on the same site. And we are now considering to introduce small modular reactors, new scale actually, that was approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States. It is one, obviously, each scenario is considering the whole system, but with emphasis on how the nuclear could penetrate, what are the quantities of potential spent fuel that we have to prepare for in order to dispose of the spent fuel. We have a law in Romania that requires the power plant to contribute 2 euros per megawatt hour of energy produced into a fund that is supposed to accumulate enough money in the 30 plus years of operation to finance the investment in the final nuclear waste deposits. What shall I tell? It's the model used this message from the IAEA, International Energy Atomic Agency, and we are developing various types of scenarios regarding of how evolution may come. We are working now on something with much less gas than before. Obviously, Romania has got its own reserves of gas deposits in offshore and in onshore. Let's not forget that the country was the first in 1857 that reported the refining of 275 tons of oil, first in the world, and then came United States, Azerbaijan, and so on. We are now considering, let's say, high-risk scenarios just to see what may happen, and those results will be ready in a few weeks, probably months. One other type of risk is the cost of, how should I put it, the cost of volatility of the power system. More renewable energy based on solar or wind are introducing higher volatility. Also hydro, having hydrolicity, as you see here on a lake. We have used the data that I showed you for precipitation just to understand how much base load we need in order to cover up for the volatilities. Obviously, Danube, you have iron gates picture in there, and the probability distribution of the Danube flow. There are data from 1850 to now on the Danube flow, and it's a robust analysis that can be done on that. Solar, wind in Romania. There are obviously in the redder area of the map a number of large wind parks, and photovoltaic. We have about 1,200 or 1,300 megawatts of photovoltaic and about 3,500 megawatts of wind park installed. Obviously, there is a limit of dispatching that power, and that is another type of risk I'm not going to consider now. It's clear that we are exposed to all sorts of potential risks, and what I showed you are mostly risk related to climate change and to system critical points. Just let me mention that at a certain moment in France, there was a commission to analyze what happened to the French nuclear policy. You know, they had a setback of nuclear. Now they are getting it back in line. And the former president of the French nuclear agency was mentioning the risk of incompetence in the decision level. It's clear that we need not just take decision based on fashion, this year we go for renewables. Next year, and we wear the blue ties, and next year is red ties, and I don't know what else. Just mention anything. It's clear that what is happening nowadays is that we need to take 2 steps back and look at the whole picture of the energy, not only at the level of each country, but at the level of the whole European Union and at the level of the world, because nowadays the flows of energy are changing drastically. And it's very clear that on the other side, we need to take action in redesigning the market of the operation of the energy market, such that it could be more resilient to attempt to use it as a weapon in an economic war that we are actually living today. This is what I wanted to tell you, and obviously I have finalized what I want to do today, to present to you today.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Maybe there is, I checked the Q&A, let's say, link, but there is no question, but maybe from the audience who would like to turn on their...
I would rather suggest that questions should be addressed to the organizers, and I will receive an email and respond to them. It's better for the time management of the session.
Okay, so please, if you have any questions, the audience, and also I will ask my question, writing you a mail. Thank you very much, Professor.
Good.
So the second presenter is Sebastian Porter from the University of Bocconi, Italy. Let me give a brief summary of his CV. He has the Master in Sustainability and Energy Management, and also a bachelor degree in Mechanical and Electrical Engineering. He has the experience as a commercial analyst about granule energy in London. Also, he's a 2-time winner, Brussels Management Challenge. They worked on industry problems in the fields of supply chain. So he has many skills in terms of language, programming, computer skills, also sports and other interests as well. So the floor is yours, Sebastian, please.
Hi, hello. Thank you for all coming. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, if you want to add something about you, please do. If I missed something,
No, you pretty much covered everything, I think. Yeah. I worked as a semiconductor engineer in Norway for a little while as well, but that's it's not related to energy, so no worries.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we do. I do, at least, yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the aim of this talk is to sort of give a brief introduction to a sort of new and growing field in energy economics known as 24/7 carbon-free energy, which centers specifically around hourly electricity markets. And during this presentation, we'll look at sort of, first of all, what the modeling says about system level impacts of moving to hourly clean electricity markets. And we'll have a look at sort of lessons from the UK on one of the only hourly systems in the world. And then finally, I think we'll also just finish this off with like a call for more research, because this is quite a new topic and there are lots of new needs still for modeling and also analysis of empirical data. So we'll skip the agenda for now, just to explain what we're going to talk about. But one of the first questions I want to ask you is, I'm sure as energy experts, this is a bit of a trick question, but what is the definition of clean energy? Now, in many cases, you can just say, okay, it's solar energy or, it's wind energy. But actually, in the case of the electricity sector, it's quite a difficult thing to define legally. And this is because all power stations use the same electricity grid, and therefore you can't track at your socket when you consume say a watt hour of electricity, when you turn your kettle on in the morning or something. You can't actually know where that electricity came from physically. And therefore, companies and the legal system need to use some other way of tracking it. And this is what they use are certificates. And basically the way these certificates work is you've got a generator on one side of the grid, a consumer on the other side of the grid. Say this is a generator is a solar farm that's generated 1 megawatt hour of electricity. You can award a certificate that represents this 1 megawatt hour of clean electricity to the solar plant. And then if a consumer wants to claim that they are using solar electricity, they can buy this certificate to prove the provenance of their electricity, basically. And these certificates are actually quite important in terms of carbon accounting, specifically when it comes to Scope 2. And this is all sort of set up by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And basically, the way Scope 2 emissions accounting currently works is you can just buy a clean energy certificate to cover your consumption, your electricity consumption. And if this electricity, like you have enough certificates to cover your whole your whole annual consumption, you can basically claim that you're emitting 0 carbon emissions for all of your electricity consumption. And this method of carbon accounting is known as market-based carbon accounting. However, this market-based carbon accounting method is based on a certificate system that actually has quite a serious problem. Now, I'm sure that you guys know that electricity must be consumed as soon as it's produced, which means that you turn a light on at 6 in the morning, for example, before the sun has risen, you're probably not using solar energy. However, in the current certificate system, the way the sort of accounting works is that everything is sort of tallied up on an annual basis, which means that if you use a megawatt hour of electricity, it doesn't really matter when you're using it in the year. You can claim to be using electricity that's generated at any point during that same year, which means that, for example, if you're a data center, for example, that has probably a base load that's quite similar to the one that's on this graph, you can claim to be using solar energy at night in winter that was actually generated in reality some point in the middle of the day in summer. Now, this obviously does not reflect the physical reality of the grid, and actually has some quite serious implications in terms of carbon accounting and then also grid stability and renewables cannibalization. And specifically, this sort of accounting system means that a lot of corporates, for example, can overestimate emission savings from their clean electricity purchasing by up to 50%, because often this is just an honest mistake, but they think that they can be using solar energy for these.
Let me send a message. Unfortunately, I think he has, Sebastian, yeah, you are here. A kind of disconnection, but I don't know whether on my side or on your side.
I think I heard something. Well, I think it just disconnected briefly on my side.
Okay.
I'll share my screen again.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, is this the right slide?
With the sun, solar energy, and I think it was a
this is where it disconnected.
Yeah, this is where you.
Okay. Yeah. So how much did you hear already?
Well, I think the first maybe 4 or 5 sentences, but I mean, it's maybe related with me. I don't know the others.
Okay, no worries. All right, so in short, I'll just go over the slide again really quickly. Basically, in the current system, due to the matching period, which is annual for the way certificates are accounted for, solar energy that was produced in summer during the middle of the day can be used to claimed against consumption that was actually in the middle of winter at night, which is physically impossible due to the way electricity grids work and the way grids are balanced in a, on a millisecond basis. And this has some quite serious implications in terms of renewables cannibalization, as well as carbon accounting for like the entities involved. Specifically, if you are a corporate and you're claiming to be using 100% clean energy for your electricity, you can say that you've reduced 100% of your scope 2 emissions, basically. But in reality, it's more likely that this number is probably close to 50%, which means that they're overestimating their emission savings by up to 50%, which means, in truth, the grid isn't decarbonizing as quickly as we'd have liked it to, basically. However, these problems haven't gone unnoticed, and a new sort of growing industry movement known as 24/7 carbon-free energy is proposing sort of a solution to this problem. And basically, it's quite simple. They say, all right, well, the problem is basically you can use electricity that's produced at any time of the year to match consumption at any other time of the year. Why don't we just make sure that it has to be matched on an hourly basis or a sub-hourly basis in a way that basically reflects the settlement times of each local electricity market. So for example, in France, it would be half hourly, or Germany, it'd be quarter hourly. And basically the intuition behind this is that by forcing companies or consumers in general to consume electricity in a more sort of realistic way, you can incentivize better behavior, and as well provide, if these consumers want to keep buying clean energy, they need to buy clean energy that actually suits their load curve. And this can have several potential benefits. First of all, in terms of rebuilding trust in the system. Currently, the system is sort of if you go onto Bloomberg, for example, you'll find lots of articles basically, sacking off the current certificate system. And that's a big problem because it's basically the basis of all scope 2 carbon accounting. So you need a credible system at the bottom of this. And secondly, one of the other potential benefits is to give additional revenues for storage and flexibility. So specifically, the idea is if you have an hourly certificate, you then therefore also have an hourly price for the certificate, which means that a storage operator, for example, that wants to be claiming to be buying and selling clean energy can buy, for example, a clean energy certificate, or basically clean energy, and this, like, the certificate is basically clean energy. They buy a clean energy certificate at, for example, 12 in the day when the sun is up, and therefore there'll be lots of solar on the grid, and therefore the certificate will be very cheap. And they can then sell this certificate, say in the evening when the sun has gone down and it's not very windy, and therefore when clean energy is very scarce, and therefore the price would be much higher. And therefore this storage utility, like this battery, for example, could make a very big profit on that. And that's, they're capturing the spread between the low and the high price hours. And finally, it also allows more accurate carbon accounting, as we mentioned before. So this is sort of the intuition behind hourly electricity markets and 24/7 carbon-free energy. But you sort of want to wonder, is this true? Does it show up in the data? Does it show up in the academic literature? And so we'll just quickly go over a few interesting papers that have come out in the last 2 years about this sort of topic. Now, I've sort of listed these papers here, but there's 3 main institutions that have been sort of investing a lot of time in research in this area. So first of all, the IEA, which published a paper in November 2022, TU Berlin in Germany, and the Princeton Zero Lab in the US. All of these papers, by the way, are using models. I think in the case of TU Berlin, it's the PI-PSA model, which is open source. So if you wanted to reproduce the research, you could just email them, and and keep their same assumptions and run the model yourself. But this also means that this is not, actual empirical data, which is obviously a shortcoming, which we'll get to at the end. Now, in terms of the system level impacts, one of the key findings about hourly electricity markets is that it can actually deliver much smarter investment in renewable energy capacity. So there were 3 case studies in these papers, and the Princeton paper looked at California. And California is quite an interesting case because they already have abundant solar resources, but they also have quite good, like easily exploitable geothermal resources, which just happen to be quite a lot more expensive than the solar resources. And therefore, if you take over the year and you price renewable energy the same way over the whole day, well, these solar resources are very, very cheap. And therefore, if you can claim to be using solar energy at night, there's no reason to invest in these clean, firm resources that are more expensive, that can cover the hours of the day that are that can't be covered by solar. However, once you move to this from an annual accounting system to an hourly accounting system, according to the modeling done by Princeton, they find that actually, as you can see here in the graph, these red elements here, this is additional capacity of geothermal. Here on the left is the sort of baseline scenario where the renewable energy is procured on an annual basis. And this light orange is just solar. So you can see that in the baseline scenario, only new solar capacity will be procured. Whereas depending on the target level for how carbon-free you want your electricity consumption to be, here on the left, it's 80%, and right at the end, it's 100%. In the 100% scenario, for example, an additional 2 gigawatts of geothermal capacity were bought that wouldn't have been bought in the case of annual accounting. And in this this trend is actually repeated across the different studies, and it depends on the market. So, for example, in India and in Indonesia, there isn't necessarily as much geothermal available, so typically it'll be covered by wind. Or in the case of Indonesia, there are also some geothermal resources. And in Denmark, for example, where wind is the sort of baseline renewable energy source that's available, it results in more solar, more natural gas power plants. But this is a specific type of natural gas power plant that basically includes it's a specific chemical process that results in just water and CO2 that's already captured. So it's considered to be clean in this case. And basically what I'm trying to say here is that these hourly markets make sure that if a consumer wants to claim that it is green, it invests in renewable energy that can actually cover its whole consumption, and therefore you end up with a much more diverse generation mix. And that means on a system level, that's actually very handy, because currently TSOs are struggling with, for example, renewable cannibalization, where basically everyone invests in cheap solar energy and you end up with a huge peak in generation in the middle of the day, which is very difficult to handle when it drops off, and actually usually consumption ends up peaking in the evenings, which is exactly when there is no longer this peak in solar energy. Now, moving on to the next key finding, which, as I mentioned before, hourly renewable energy markets can promote the integration of storage on the grid. And this specifically, this graph here shows the pricing of what are known as TEECs, which is time-stamped energy attribute certificates. That's the sort of US terminology for these certificates. Usually they're known as granular certificates. And here we can see that there's actually a spread over the day of $106 per megawatt hour, which is basically, it's like doubling what is like your normal wholesale power price in some ways. I mean, obviously now the prices are a little bit higher for some reason, but this spread over the day means that a battery, for example, that can operate, at midday here, for example, buying these certificates at $0 megawatt hour and then selling them at $106 per megawatt hour, they can that's a business model for them, basically. It's a great way of incentivizing investment in battery capacity that's much needed on the grid currently, especially, for example, in California. And you can actually see this as well in the sort of capacity modeling. You can see here, for example, that for 100% clean energy targets, here on the right in California, you can see this little blue section at the top of the 100% target. That's actually also additional battery capacity. So it also shows up in the actual sort of capacity modeling. It's not just a theoretical, you know, yay, there's a business model. It actually does impact the grid. And this third finding is that going to 100% hourly renewable energy matching is more expensive in terms of sort of compared to just annual matching, because with annual matching, you can obviously, you'll probably just procure solar if you're in California, or wind if you're in Ireland, for example, because those are the cheapest available renewable energy sources, but they don't necessarily cover your actual consumption. However, and also the typical cost premiums for 100% range between, you know, 10, 15, 20%, and on the upper end, maybe 30, 40%, depending on the local grid. However, while this is more expensive for the individual consumer, actually what happens is that buying electricity generation or like capacity that is able to fully match a consumer's consumption is actually extremely valuable in terms of the system in general. So specifically, it can, as I mentioned before, it can help prevent renewables cannibalization and grid congestion, stuff like that. And in the IEA study, they looked at basically what the what the baseline cost of investing in a traditional, like an average grid mix basically would be, and what the system benefits would be of investing in 100% hourly coverage of a load. And here you can see that actually in some cases, specifically for like covering the whole load, not just 90%, but like 100% of all hours covered 100% of the time by renewable energy, the system benefits actually are greater than that of just investing in your average grid mix and just keeping to build out generators, you know, without thinking of anything. So in some ways, actually on a system level, it basically sort of saves money, even though on an individual level, it can end up being a little bit more expensive, because eventually, basically, if for example, a consumer is just buying solar energy, that means that someone somewhere will also have to pay for example, a gas peaking plant to cover the extra, the hours of the day when solar isn't operating. And that gas peaking plant will have to be paid for by the system as a whole. And therefore the cost will end up being spread somewhere, just not to the actual individual consumer of this solar energy, for example, if you're signing a PPA. And finally, the fourth key finding was that hourly renewable energy markets actually deliver much greater grid decarbonization outcomes. Now, for example, in California, it resulted in roughly 2.5 million tons of additional CO2 being mitigated versus annual renewable electricity account. So in this case, it represents an increase of 84 to 120%, depending on the assumptions used, relative to the baseline case where for example, consumers just buy renewable energy that covers their consumption, but on an annual basis. And this was also found in Germany, where about 2 million tons of CO2 would be reduced. The reduction in CO2 would be 2 million tons greater versus annual renewable energy procurement. And that represents a smaller increase in Germany because they have a better sort of spread of a natural grid, a better grid mix than California currently, but it's still an increase of about 30% in terms of the emissions reductions. Now, I think the modeling is pretty unequivocal in this when it comes to the benefits of hourly renewable energy markets, but this is all theoretical until you actually try to implement it in practice. And I've been working in the UK on basically one of the only implementations of hourly renewable energy markets in the world. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what we learned from this, and sort of lessons that can be translated into other potential projects. Now, first of all, because of the way these certificate markets work, it's extremely important in order for a project to go ahead to involve a very wide range of stakeholders. And this includes the names here on these slides, including Nord Pool, for example, the power market operator, which is which will be needed as a partner to sort of get an actual hourly certificate market running as well. But also you need the grid settlements body to ensure like effective balancing. And the certificate market is separate from the actual physical electricity delivery, but you still want to make sure it's balanced in order to sort of like, you want it to align as much as possible with the electricity market. Then also you need what's known as a registry to track these certificates and ensure no double counting happens, which is this unicorn company. And then you need all sorts of other supporters, including utilities, TSO, in this case in the UK it's National Grid, and Catapult Energy Systems is a government sort of innovation program specifically for the energy market. But actually, one of the most interesting things that emerged in this demonstrator project is that utilities really emerge as key players in this sector. And the way currently the project's set up in the UK is that you've got you've got generation and you've got consumption, and there's an intermediary between them, which is the utility, which means it basically sits at a key node in the market, because these utilities have access to both generation data and consumption data and are already experienced in sort of matching consumption and production of the actual physical electricity, and therefore they're very well placed to also manage consumption and generation matching when it comes to sort of the non-physical commodity of like the certificates. Now, the way this demonstrator project works is that basically you need some way of ensuring that there's no double counting, and therefore you need to be sort of involve the legacy registry. And that's actually what the sort of final important point is, that the way these registries, these sort of certificate systems were set up, basically one of the key goals of them is to make double counting of renewable energy put onto the grid completely impossible, because otherwise, otherwise, for example, two consumers could be claiming to be using the same renewable energy, and obviously the claims can have no grounds in reality, and that would be a serious problem for the system. And therefore, in order to make sure that can't happen with an hourly market, you also need to tie this hourly market to the legacy system, tie like the hourly certificates to the base, like the legacy annual certificates. And you can do this by basically saying, if you are a consumer that wants to claim to be using a certain amount of hourly, say you want to cover a certain amount of consumption with hourly certificates, say your consumption is 1 megawatt hour, you also need to have, first need to have a 1 megawatt hour certificate that's sort of the legacy one, an annual certificate. And only once you've got that legacy annual certificate can you then move to the additional granularity of granular certificates by basically sort of being a part of this program and sort of in some ways chopping up the certificate temporally. And the reason that this is so important is that if you don't have this already have this this legacy certificate, you're actually not legally allowed to claim anything about your electricity, which means that if you try to claim that you are covered on an hourly basis straight away before being covered on an annual basis, those claims can actually have no legal basis. And that actually means that if you want to run a project on hourly renewable electricity in any other jurisdiction in the world, say the US or Germany, you also need to have a similar system where you make sure that the annual certificate is present first, and then only can you then move to an hourly granularity in your electricity account. So moving on to the conclusions. Basically, it looks like hourly renewable electricity markets are, well, they're a new and rapidly evolving field, as you can tell. Most of this research is less than 2 years old that I've been presenting, and this project here in the UK has only been running for about 6 months. It looks quite likely there's a huge possibility they could play a big role in the energy transition. And actually also in Europe, if you think about the need for getting off Russian gas, well, what we've seen is that in the modeling in California, the plants that end up being most displaced under this renewable energy system are gas combined cycle plants. So it's this purple on this area here. It's actually gas plants that end up being displaced the most, which means that it also has you know, we can talk about nice wishy-washy energy transition. It's nice and green, but actually it also has real sort of geopolitical energy security value, because you incentivize investment in sources that can cover the Russian gas that we no longer have access to. And finally, I sort of want to end on a sort of call for more academic studies. So specifically, it'd be really interesting to see more studies on policy implications of, for example, setting renewable energy targets on an hourly basis for businesses or on an hourly basis for utilities. And also in general, there's no sort of empirical data yet, and therefore it's sort of important that once some empirical data comes out, that sort of checks are run to see that this empirical data does at least somewhat match the modeling that's been done previously. All right, I think that's basically it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Actually, we are very few, so that's why I think we don't have many questions. I don't know, maybe you prefer to have written questions, or I would like to ask one, but we have a few minutes more time. Can I, or should I write?
Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
What I understood, I mean, it's very interesting, first of all, let me say, and it's very promising, but I mean, these certificates should be shared by all trading countries. Am I right? This system.
Yes, that's actually another controversial aspect of them, which is one of the things that's actually being reviewed by, for example, ENTSO-E. So ENTSO-E recently published a position paper, I think it was late summer, that basically said not only do you need to move to more like hourly temporal granularity, but you also need to link it to sort of the actual physical electricity flows on a geographic basis. So currently, for example, I think the EU Parliament can claim to be powered by geothermal energy from Iceland, which is obviously a physically pretty tenuous claim to make. And one of the other actually aspects of this 24/7 carbon-free energy sort of movement is actually also moving to more additional locational restrictions, and maybe, for example, making trades of certificates match trades on an actual physical electricity over interconnectors, for example. So if you want to buy a certificate from Germany, you can't buy more certificates than go over the interconnectors from Germany to, and for example, say you're in the UK, you can't buy more certificates than the actual physical electricity that flows from Germany to the UK.
But if, I mean, eventually it is completed, then this will actually introduce a kind of stability to the energy prices as well, electricity prices as well. If, I mean, eventually it is successful. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. It was very interesting to hear, to listen to you. Okay, Professor, do you have any questions, or should I move to proceed to our last but not the least presenter? Okay, so let me go on with Johanna Rust. She's a PhD candidate at the Ruhr-Universität Bochum and scholarship holder of the Foundation of the German Economy. In her master's thesis, she investigated control mechanisms in Chinese energy policies using the example of national oil companies. It's interesting, you are on the other side of Sebastian. Okay, we will hear actually, I mean, maybe not, you will also defend renewables as well. Okay, so the floor is yours, please. You have time as much as you like, because we spared a lot of time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's actually a lucky position I'm in. So I hope that everyone can see the slides.
Yes, your slides are on.
Yes, well, I'm jumping actually in a completely different geographic region. And since I'm also a political science, I'm not that much into the economics, so not many numbers and well, accountings. And the subject I will talk about today, it's also part of a work in progress, so it's my dissertation project. And Therefore, I try to stick to the most important things. I try to keep them in line because obviously I will touch several aspects, and the title already is quite quite long and complex. So it's about the security as a changing parameter or factor in foreign energy and security policy and the implementation. And for that, I will take the case study of the European Union and the People's Republic of China and Central Asia to have a closer look on the foreign energy and security policy of the both actors. I will start with the method I used, then the aim of my research shortly formulated, and then going on to the context and why I have taken Central Asia as a case study, and then touch on the analysis of the European Union and China, how they engage in Central Asia and the takeaways, and then come to the results. When we talk about Central Asia, it's for European people not always clear when I talk to them what I'm talking about. Where is Central Asia? What countries are part of it? So here is briefly a map showing the 5 Central Asian countries: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And already quite clear on the map, we see China on the eastern side of the region. So China is bordering 3 of 5 Central Asian nations. And the picture, the photograph is actually showing Samarkand, and I wanted to show it because it's a very nice example that history and also the ancient Silk Road has something to do with China and the European Union, or had in the past centuries. So it's actually something that is reviving in the past decades again. As we political scientists almost always do, we look at the literature, we do a review, a screening, and my personal, well, let's say my goal was to find actually the academic definition of security. We already heard in the previous speech that it is very hard to find a definition for clean energy. So we have sometimes terms that are very hard to define and to bring them or to catch them in a very decisive way. And for me, I see the same problem in the energy security term, because we use it very often. I mean, the whole IAEA Symposium is around energy security questions and concerns and challenges, but the term security itself is hardly defined. So what does it mean to use the term in the combination of energy security and therefore concepts and theories? The analysis I'm doing is to look at the European Union's engagement in Central Asia, and by looking at the foreign policies, the strategies, agreements, dialogues, whatever had been released, and then to compare both implementations or how the approaches of both major powers have been implemented in the region. And this is also evidenced by expert interviews I conducted in 2021 and 2 in Uzbekistan and in Kyrgyzstan. And well, why is this so important to do? It's because we have a foreign policy, especially in the European Union, that tries to gain a foothold in Central Asia since years. And let's say it's not that successful as it might have been, and especially compared to China. I try to comprise it in questions because that's sometimes easier to address the problems at hand. The first question would have been what approaches and what kind of understanding of security is providing foreign energy and security policy with ideas and concepts. Because, as I said, it's very often used, the word, but what does it mean in the context of foreign policy, and what does it also have as a consequence for the implementation of it? The second one is what is going on in Central Asia regarding energy and security issues. That's what we will mainly talk about today. then how can the European Union devise efficient foreign energy and security policy in third countries? In this case, Central Asia, but it's a very basic question for the European Union, as regarding then the fourth question, how can be dealt with China in third countries? Because we have, at least from the European side, different endeavors to find the balance to encounter Chinese presence in third countries, and Central Asia is a very predestined region. Central Asia has several points why it fits into the comparison of both foreign energy and security strategies of the major powers of the European Union and China. First of all, we have more or less 4 major powers today, and that's the US, that's the European Union, that's Russia, and that's China. And Central Asia is in the middle of 3 of 4 power blocks. So it's a very geostrategic region. Then the European Union and China have similar interests in the region. So they have, I will call them national interests, also in the case of the European Union, although we all know that it's not that easy to speak as one actor in the European Union, but regarding foreign policy in third countries, I will do that to make it easier today. And then I will talk, or well, I consider it as a 2-level diplomacy we'll find here, because on the one hand, we have, of course, each actor engaging in Central Asia, but we also have always in mind the European Union-China relations. And so that is actually something that will implicate then from the region to the, as I will say now, higher level, but to the more overall goal of finding a way to cope with China. Central Asia is a very resource-rich region, but it's also a transit region. It has also to gain some profit of it because it's a landlocked region. And it has export market opportunities because the population is very young. We have, I think, an average still below 30 or around 30. So that's exceptional and a very increasing population. And of course, as I mentioned already, the geostrategic aspects, it serves as a security cushion. And Central Asia was until the 1990s part of the Soviet Union. And before, actually, there hadn't been that the countries we see today, the borders. So with the jump into the independency of the 5 countries, they also had to find themselves anew as national states. And after this time where they had been very interconnected by the given circumstances of the Soviet Union, they mostly changed into being very isolated because they had to find their own way. So it was not only that. And then there's now since, 5 to 10 years where it's gaining more importance that they are seeking for reconnection and to see how can we work together to find profits or to mutual benefiting from each other. Some things of the slide I think I already mentioned because it's actually quite important also for the region that they gained the independence in the 1990s, because then very different dynamics started that have or has still some effects on today's policies in the region. They are authoritarian political systems and with few changes in the top. So that's actually something very similar to China, where we also have a very continuous development on the top of the government. And that's also one aspect why these countries understand themselves quite well regarding the political everyday work scheme. The European Union is so far without a comprehensive and hands-on strategy for the region. And in comparison to that, China is very much engaged, and that since years, and investing massively, especially in infrastructure. The Belt and Road Initiative, I guess, is a name that everyone in this symposium knows. But what we don't have is, especially in the scientific literature, contributions that deal with China's impact on foreign policy development of the European Union towards Central Asia, and then in a broader sense to third countries, and how it impacts actually the European Union, or if it does it. When we come to the other side, China in the region, we talk about energy, we talk about resources. And since China was very active, I think 1990s onwards, it began with diplomatic relations in the beginning, and it was very fast going that they were seeking to make some agreements and some deals. Turkmenistan counts for 9.5% of the world's total proven natural gas resources, so they have abundant opportunities to export, actually, because the population is not that large. They're the fourth largest natural gas producer worldwide, and China in the past years replaced actually Russia and Turkmenistan, and received in 2017 around 94% of Turkmen gas export, which is around 90% of the total value of the country's exports. And that's a huge problem actually for Turkmenistan right now, because it's a very high dependency actually on China, and they have therefore also leverage in the country. And in the diagram we see the dark blue part in the upper part of the picture, and that's Central Asian imports, also Burma, but Central Asia accounts for a large share of Chinese, especially gas imports. And they also had in their 5th-year plans the clear announcement to push that up because of the green development in China. Here we can see the yellow lines, which represent the existing gas pipelines. There are 3 lines already. A 4th is in discussion, and the 4th one should also go a different route. But as the terrain in Central Asia is very mountainous, especially in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, it's related to a huge amount of investments that are needed to do that. And that's also a problem for the other green line to the south, which would actually be a nice thing for Turkmenistan to diversify also its exports. But as the green one to the west via the Caspian Sea, the green to the south, the Tapi gas pipeline, is also a very difficult concept, because many or some powers don't want to see that happen. And it's also, again, a very intensive construction. So again, there's the question, which country can support these constructions? And then the name of China rises again. On the right side, we see China, and we see how important it is that from Central Asia are coming the imports of energy and resources. It is also accompanied by many infrastructure projects such as railways and such as roads. And this is stabilizing actually China's energy and resource diversity, and therefore energy security picture. The European Union has overall a very common approach when it comes to the region. They are seeing Central Asia as a region when they are talking in their strategies, like the Central Asian strategies we have in place. But they also have bilateral agreements, and they started actually with Kazakhstan as the first country of the 5. And they, in 2015, they already signed the enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement, and that entered into force in March 2020. And Kazakhstan and European Union's trade increased from 2.2 billion in 1999 to over or almost 30 billion in 2018. And the most promising sectors of trade are actually transport and logistics. And that's also where the European Union tries to offer something to the region. It wants to profit them from technologies and standards. And as far as I know, already in the beginning of the 1990s, some oil companies, such from the Italian Eni and also the Total and Shell, were quite active in Kazakhstan to explore oil fields. And according to numbers from the Ministry of Energy in Kazakhstan, about 80% of the country's total oil exports go to Europe. It's also important to note that Kazakhstan covers more than 21% of the European Union uranium demand. I think it's the largest share from a single country. The challenge the European Union always face, and the critics from the Central Asian, is that they always include values such as human rights, rule of law, good governance, civil society, and cultural development as parts of the bilateral agreements and support. So that is something I will label with national interests of the European Union, because it appears always in the approach when it comes towards the region and when they do or want to do some cooperation. For the other three countries, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, they also, at least Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, have the EPCAs already finalized, and Kyrgyzstan, I think it's also on the way to get into force. And with Tajikistan, the European Union announced last week, actually, that they are starting negotiating it. This is quite important because it is a new sign on the European Union side that they really want to do something. But still, we have some challenges ahead when it comes to the implementation of the European Union's interests. On the left side, we see that China, as the red, and in the red line in the lowest part of the three, is surpassing all the others when it comes to trade. So it has a huge share in and a say actually in Central Asia and the policies that happen there. The background of the European Union's approaches are the Central Asian strategies of the European Union, and the last one is from 2019. And actually from Romania, the researcher Engelescu, she did many contributions, and one of the few with regard to Central Asia and the European Union's engagement. And she did a SWOT analysis that's actually quite nice, because we can see, or she tried to put it in a form and to divide the different kind of aspects in the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and threats. And it more or less says, and that's regarding to the last one, to the 2019 strategy, that still we have the problem of the European Union approaching Central Asia as one region. And they're trying to be more precise. They're trying to offer now cooperation more than like being a donor, because that was a huge, or is a huge problem in the perceptions of the Central Asians. According to some persons I interviewed, they said, yes, money is always welcome, but we do not need the attachments. And that's the other one. The other question the Central Asian interviewees and experts told me, or what was like a perception they displayed, was, where is the European Union? Because they said there are so many people of the European Union, but we don't see any concrete points on any projects they're implemented and help us. That's a huge difference to the Chinese, who are pouring in money and they are building up infrastructure. They are actually establishing substantial structures that the people can use and profit from. But also that is not without any risks. To come to the results. Security is a very difficult term to catch. And the concept of energy security itself has changed in the past decades. In the beginning, we started with the fossil fuels and the famous Churchill decision on the marine ships to switch from coal to petroleum. And with his announcement, then diversity is like the most important thing when it comes to securing energy or energy security itself. And today we have a high complexity of diverse resources of infrastructure networks, offline and online. We have climate change that is affecting everyone. And that makes a picture where it is very hard to draw a line between different definitions that could help us devise very specific constructions and concepts to go on. And in the 1950s, there was one of the first researchers who tried to deal with security as a term and try to define it. And according to him, he said that this term might not even have any precise meaning at all, and that national security or national interests definitely have not the same meaning to different people. And this is actually leading to the difficulty to match, also to see that security is more an attribute to a certain circumstance than as a concept itself. And that can be, well, that can be challenged actually. But security more or less is the absence of threats, in short. And according to Buzan, which is also one of the most famous security researchers and has done many contributions, he's also hinting out to the freedom of threat, as I just mentioned, but then also to the independent identity and the functional integrity against forces of change. And in that sense, we can find many linkages then between the implementations of both actors also in Central Asia. I tried to somehow bring that all together of the European Union and for the People's Republic of China. When we come to the security, to look how aligned is it actually in the foreign policy, we see that in the European Union, it's more scattered and fragmented. And in China, we have it very well streamlined also due to this circumstance and on the political side, of course. The actors involved are on the European Union level, many, with many opinions and many needs. And on the Chinese side, we have the state. And the state is also, as formulated in the security law of 2015, responsible for making the decisions and saying what is security for and what do we need. The national interests formulated in the foreign policy can be found by the European Union and on the Chinese side. But when it comes to the implementation in Central Asia, most of the national interests the European Union is formulating cannot be found. And on the Chinese side, we can say, yes, they can be found and they were implemented. In sense of controlling external threats, the European Union is not really matching these in the third countries or in Central Asia. When we talk about China, they are matching by force. So they get it more or less to be very successful in having a hand on the infrastructure they create and also on the societal side, actually, also trying very hard with soft power tools to get a foothold in countries where they have some economic interests in, to make sure to control also the dynamics that are going on and also how it is seen from other sides. The European Union security interests fit very well in the picture of Wulfer when he said that that's a very challenging thing to bring it together in a very aligned policy. And the European Union has many institutionalized positions actually and dialogues and agreements in place with Central Asia, but it is with a little meaning, many words and, well, not that much actions. That is the response from Central Asia. Central Asia is also not looking at the European Union as a strong actor or partner. They're more seeing the European Union as a donor and accepting that the European Union is in the region. And they know how important it is also to have a third power because Russia is still a very influencing power. And then we have China, and in the example of Turkmenistan, it is very clear that very fast they can slide down to a relationship to China, which is high dependent and might even lose some freedom and also national sovereignty when China is getting too powerful in the region. The concurrence, yeah, well, and as I mentioned, the European Union always wants to, well, promote its values, but that's actually nothing what the Central Asian countries are so keen about to see and to hear. So that's very difficult to find a way here. And then I was looking on the congruence, how congruent is the understanding of security in foreign energy and security policy. And with regard to the European Union, it decreased and reached actually a low point by the end of 2020. And now they are trying to come back and fill it again with some more substantial steps. The European Union definitely has to change if it wants to be recognized as a partner and working for results. China created very smartly in the 1996 the Shanghai Five. They're consisting of China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. So all the countries China is bordering at in Central Asia. And since 2001, it's called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and now it's including Uzbekistan. And today they have many more members. And the initial idea was to solve border issues and also get control over Xinjiang, the province in the west. We have heard about it in Europe in the past month with regard to the Uyghurs, because that's a real issue there with the ethnic group that's also living in other countries, like in Kazakhstan and in Kyrgyzstan. China very much focuses clearly on national interests, so they are securing national resources. It was a clear also announcement of the Chinese political elite that what they want to do and what is necessary for China to develop. So they did it, securing as much control over exploring, extracting, transporting, and refining the natural resources and using it and also selling it. And then building up transit routes for import, but even more important also for export. So we have in Kazakhstan on the border to Xinjiang in the west of China, the Kyrgyz. It's a huge hub where over a railway mostly transports also to Europe are shipped. And it's the middle of nowhere. It's a special economic zone, and it gained really a relevance for the region to be one of the ports where it's a dry port where China is shipping a lot towards the west, and therefore China also the Central Asian region knows also about that and how important it is for China. But still, China has the higher or the bigger leverage there. The congruence, so to say, for the Chinese side and the understanding of security in foreign energy and security policy is high. And it was also translated into substantial results. But still we have questions in place regarding the dependencies that remain. With that, I will conclude. And here's some resources that I selected. And I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johanna. Well, is there any question, please?
I had a quick question, which was, so after the Ukraine war, Russia's kind of been seen as being in retreat in Central Asia, right? Like Kazakhstan has definitely been like recently sort of showing more independence of thought, let's say. And I was wondering, like, has the EU been capitalizing on this, or is it mostly been China sort of trying to fill the void left by Russia?
If you talk, I mean, specifically about the situation we have now, like during the crisis, China is very much in place. They will stay there. They also have substantial interests with regard to the south. But I mean, it's difficult to say because Russia tried to or is negotiating the natural gas union. It is very well to doubt whether this is something they're interested in, because Uzbekistan is one of the major powers in the region. It's can be a little bit like compared with Germany in Europe. It's a country with a very high population. They have high economic rates, so they're very powerful itself, have also more or less self-sufficient military. And what Uzbekistan is deciding is more or less also an indicator for the region. And Uzbekistan is actually not interested to deepen the relations with Russia. And so they are trying to hold a place for everyone. I mean, Turkey is one of the largest trade partners also for the region, especially for Uzbekistan in the construction sector, for example. So Uzbekistan tries to balance out, but the European Union has not yet found a way to step in when it's necessary with the answers the region needs. So what they did also in the past weeks is they made many actions regarding civil rights, human rights, the rule of law, things like that. They are very important. That's not to discuss, but the region really needs some very specific and very practical approaches. And in that regard, it's like Uzbekistan is turning more to the south, so to say. They also have very strong relations with Iran. They try to balance that because they know that it's not easy or they don't want them to get too strong. But Turkey is one of the best example to mention that there are opportunities between Russia, China, and the European Union for the countries to get a counterbalance against these influences in the region. But China will or is still like I have to be cautious about that, but China has some countries very much in its hands.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will conclude. Thank you, the presenters, and thank you, the Italian Association of Energy Economists. I wish you all the best for the new year. So see you sometime. I wish to come together face to face and discuss all these issues. Very interesting presentations, different presentations, different aspects of energy issues. Yeah, it was very interesting to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Çelik.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. So, Anna, thank you very much. Yes. Okay.